All right, we're continuing here with this part and make sure that we get this. This is actually the last part of the one before, but I did stop it because that was going on pretty long too. So this will be a continuation of that. And real quick here, let me just make sure I've got everything in spot here. So we're still in session 3, but we're going to look at origins. And this is another big aspect to the Christian worldview. God created all things, origins. We see that Acts chapter 17, 24, 25, and 26. So back to these verses here. Where did we come from? How did we get here? Did aliens colonize the earth, which some people believe? Some believe that. I had a dentist who believed that, by the way. Are we the result of random, uncaring evolutionary mutation, or did God purposefully, specifically, intentionally, and personally design us? So again, this is another question that's at the heart of a worldview that we need to pass on to other people. And some have been told and believe they're actually an accident. Some believe they have no value. Some individuals grew up in families where they're beaten down verbally every single day, and they have no concept of love or anything. They think they're a mistake, actually. And this matter of origins helps us answer these all-important questions. Where did I come from? How do we get here? So, Paul doesn't give the details. At least we don't have them recorded, though we may have gone into more detail there. He said that in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Paul said that. Again, he doesn't give the details, but the basic principle, we could say. And I believe God created all things in 6 literal days. I think the text is very clear with that. Put everything on earth, including the dinosaurs, by the way, which is a whole other topic, but very cool to discuss. But God did not use, nor was evolution a part of it. Why? Well, evolution is a faith. Evolution requires faith based upon a preconceived worldview of naturalism. Evolution is one of the biggest lies that has been pushed onto humanity. It says that over billions of years, the universe formed over millions of years, which, by the way, keeps changing. They keep changing the time frame and everything. Humanity came from slime to a single-celled organism, mutated then into complex organisms, then into apes, and somehow then to people. It's not possible. It's just not possible. There are 0 transitional forms in the fossil record. There is no evidence that mutations add genetic materials. Actually, it loses genetic materials. There's no evidence that a single-celled organism can become a complex organism. It doesn't happen. Evolutionary theory, by the way, says that a loving God did not purposefully and specifically create humanity, and it says we're not accountable to him. That's part of the reason why evolution is so dangerous. This is one reason why evolution is not only bad science, but it's worse theology. And unfortunately, there are many Christians around the world who embrace some form of evolutionary thought into their worldview. But God made Adam, God made Eve, and humanity started with those two. And again, Paul does talk about Adam. He does talk about Adam. We are not accidents. We did not come from goo to you by way of the zoo. I don't know if you've ever heard that phrase before. We didn't come from slime. We're not mistakes. So where do we come from? God. He created all things. He created everything. That's the origins. So when it comes to people born today, where did I come from? Well, yes, you came from your parents. But where did my parents come from? From their parents? Well, where did we ultimately come from? Well, in the beginning, on day 6, God formed Adam out of the dust of the ground, breathed into him life. And he took a rib from him and made Eve. And from Adam and Eve, all of humanity came from. And you can read that in Genesis 1 through 11. And then, of course, he goes to Abraham in chapter 12. But this, again, is so important. And I have a question for you guys. Does it make a difference in someone's life when they realize God made me? Or if they think I'm the product of random, uncaring, evolutionary chance?
Yes, it matters. Has to do probably because your identity and where you're from, what you're worth.
Yep, exactly. Your identity, how much you're worth. What about your actions? How would that change your actions?
I think life's more meaningful before you kind of live just to live. So when something goes wrong, then I think it'd be easy to not think living is worth it. But because God created us, we have a purpose and there's intent, and we're worth something more than just breathing. You know?
Very good. Very good. Anything else? What about how we treat people? Now, if you remember Genesis 1 and 2, originally Adam and Eve were made in God's image. Now, we still retain part of that. That means that every human being has worth and has dignity, has value, and that we should not demean anyone or devalue anyone, regardless of what color their skin is, what background they have, how much money they have or don't have, whatever their educational status is, whether they have all of their cognitive abilities or whether they're disabled, whether they're old or whether they're young. We are to treat people appropriately and honor them as people and love them too. So that's another way. That's a big difference because evolution says, guess what? Survival of the fittest. And if you've seen that in school or in business, you will sooner or later. You know, someone's got to get ahead and they will crush down everyone else around them in order to get ahead. That's not a biblical worldview. That's an evolutionary worldview. Now, whether that person holds to it or not, that's another story. But, you know, survival of the fittest is very different than God made me. God made me. Good. So just as to conclude this session, we've briefly looked at some of the verses in Acts 17, answered two of the main worldview questions. Does God exist and can he be known? That's relationship, which of course, yes, the answer is. Second, where did we come from? That's the issue of origins. Origins. God does exist. He can be known. He created us. And these, again, two vital answers to these questions shape a big part of our worldview. Now, do you guys have any other questions? Then I'm going to have you kind of chime in as to how you would teach these two things. Any further questions? Okay. So now it's your turn. When it comes to teaching these two worldview questions, how would you do it and what would you do? Now, again, this is a very brief overview and you can elaborate on some things if you would like as well. I'll let you think. I know I've dumped a lot on you guys this morning.
I think what happens is this is like so in a good way. It's very dense and there's a lot of material, and so I think the way that you've presented it is probably one of the better ways to present it. I think specifically just because there's so much information and it's important for people to know like the context and important for them to understand like the background. But I definitely would emphasize like you did, specifically like the process or like the progression like in the verses, and then kind of just to map that literally the same way that you did, and answer those questions and also like explore the way that like Paul is using those verses to explain, you know, who God is, you know, qualities of God, creator, sustainer, things like that, and then to like go from there, because everything is very like it carries on and it like encourages the other item, and I think without doing that, like to take away from that kind of weakens it to me, in my opinion. So maybe others have a different way that they would teach it.
Good, good. And very quickly, thank you very much. I appreciate that. You know, each of each style of teaching is going to be different than mine, and that's not a bad thing. You know, so when you use these resources, you know, take them, make them your own. Again, you can put different pictures in there, use different illustrations or examples from your own life or from someone um, you know, to help the people, because you will know your audience a lot better than I will. And and this is just, again, a very concise, brief overview of these questions, and each one can be elaborated on. You can elaborate on, you know, God as Savior. If you're talking to an audience where there's, you know, a few individuals who don't know Christ, make sure you share the gospel. Great place to do it. You can even ask more questions to the audience or the group, whether it's online or whether it's in person. You know, so each style is going to be different, and that's fine, and that's good. That's how God made us. You know, but yeah, thank you very much again. I appreciate that. But I just wanted to remind you all of that, and you can, again, feel free to add, you know, to the PowerPoints if you're going to use them. If you can use them, it's up to you. I don't know if it's going to be available or not, but um, just remember that you don't have to do everything exactly the way I do it. Anything else? How else would you go about talking to someone about God being real, that we can know him, or the issue of origins? I mean, the issue of origins, there are ministries dedicated just to that topic primarily. And that's a big, big topic, of course, a very important topic. And one of the reasons is because, you know, where we think we came from, in part, is going to determine how we live our lives. So is there anything else that you would change or modify or do in a different way, or something I could do better?
You know what I would also add? I kind of on the spur of the moment. I think like the questions about who God is are important. So like a lot of with the identity and like his existence. But then I also would say that like a comparison, like maybe a more stark comparison to like the other, for example, like gods or deities would be really compelling, because like again, we remember that like Jesus was the only one, or God was the only one to send his own son to walk the path of, you know, humanity. And I think that characterizes God in a way that that really drives home the idea of relationship, and may really like set apart you know, other religions and other thoughts about, you know, gods apart from the Christian God.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Very good. That's a great idea. You know, you could even look at that and use some of the ancient pagan gods, like that Paul even would have seen in Athens, and even some of the false gods today. You know, Islam is a classic example. I mean, the God of Islam is very different than the God of the Bible. They are not the same, completely different gods. And when you look at what Islam is, they are worshiping an idol. You know, so all the millions of Muslims around the world who worship their God Allah are lost. They don't know who God is. And in their mind, they can't know who God is. Because for them, the idea of God being loving is a very foreign concept to them, even to this day. So that's a great example. It's a great idea. Anything else? Okay. Well, this will end this session. We do have the one more session coming up here in just a little bit. This was session 4. I'm sorry, session 3. Session 4 is coming up next. So I'll go ahead and stop the recording for this, and then we'll pick up in session 4 in just a moment.